Let's dive right into this explainer and completely rethink how we approach ISMS risk management. If you're working with ISO/IEC 42001-2023, you already know risk management isn't just some box to check. It's literally the heartbeat of your information security management system. But here's a pretty startling reality for you. A massive percentage of ISMS implementations actually fail their audits, not because they couldn't fix a problem, but because their initial risk identification process completely missed the thread in the first place. So today, we're going to look at the specialized, advanced techniques that take your risk identification from a basic passive checklist to a highly dynamic, forward-looking security shield.
So, here's the ultimate compliance reality check. Are you proactively hunting down vulnerabilities, or are you just waiting around for the alarms to go off? In the world of ISO/IEC 42001-2023, being reactive is a recipe for instant non-compliance. Look, if you're only finding out about vulnerabilities after an incident occurs, your system is failing its primary objective. The standard demands a deeply proactive approach. It requires us to anticipate complex threats long before they ever have the chance to materialize into a breach.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the foundation of risk identification, explore some advanced methods, dig into TVA and business impact analysis, talk about integrating stakeholder feedback, and wrap up with documenting compliant risk findings. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. The Foundation of Risk Identification. Let's talk about identifying the unknowns.
You know, risk isn't just about shadowy hackers trying to bash through a firewall. In the context of this standard, we're talking about literally anything that threatens the core CIA triad of information security. Think about it across all three of those pillars. Sure, a compromised password impacts confidentiality, but what about a subtle software glitch that silently corrupts your financial records over time? Well, that destroys data integrity. Or how about a local power outage that brings down your servers for 3 days, totally obliterating your availability? If a scenario negatively impacts any of those three pillars, it is a risk that you are required to formally identify.
Because look, you simply cannot treat a risk you haven't identified. It's the absolute bedrock of a compliant ISMS. It's kind of wild how often organizations will rush out to buy some massive, expensive zero-day endpoint protection, the treatment, right? Without actually mapping out what specific critical data assets they're even trying to protect in the first place. You can't apply a treatment to a disease you haven't diagnosed. If your identification phase is weak or superficial, your entire security posture is misaligned and compromised from day one.
All right, Section 2. Advanced Risk Identification Methods. How we move beyond basic brainstorming.
So look at the stark contrast between these two approaches. On one hand, you've got risk workshops. These are great for pulling people from various departments into a room to uncover risks that cross operational lines. But group dynamics can be tricky, right? The highly technical stuff kind of gets glossed over, and that is exactly where structured interviews come in. Sitting down one-on-one with your CISO or a lead developer lets you dig really deep into isolated vulnerabilities that a broader group would completely miss. To hit compliance with advanced methods, you essentially need both, the wide net and the surgical scalpel.
Now, beyond just talking to your team, advanced identification requires rigorous data analysis, both internal and external. The standard heavily encourages us to look backward to protect the future. Let's say a specific vulnerability in a widely used cloud CRM was exploited at 3 of your competitors last quarter. Well, if your external data analysis doesn't flag that trend as a high-priority risk for your own organization, that's an instant red flag for a lead auditor. Systematically tracking these trends proactively arms your ISMS against known, evolving threats.
Moving on to Section 3, TVA and business impact analysis. These are our analytical heavyweights.
When you're building out a threat and vulnerability analysis, or TVA, an auditor really wants to see how you map specific internal weaknesses directly to external threats. Think about it. A vulnerability on its own, like an outdated firewall, isn't really a realized risk until it meets a threat, like a cyber attack. By systematically listing out these external threats and linking them to your internal vulnerabilities, you generate a clear risk score. You multiply the likelihood of that threat actually exploiting the vulnerability by the severity of the outcome, and boom, you've got a prioritized, highly objective view of where your system is most dangerously exposed.
And to deepen that whole process, we bring in the business impact analysis. Think of the TVA as the how and the BIA as the so what. Staggering number of companies misalign their security budgets because they skip this exact phase. They end up buying tools for highly unlikely threats but completely ignore what happens if their billing system goes down for a week. The BIA ensures you focus resources on protecting critical assets by quantifying the actual operational disruption. It lets you prioritize risks not just by the likelihood of a breach, but by the devastating reality of the operational fallout.
Section 4. Integrating stakeholder feedback. It's all about taking a truly collaborative approach.
Listen, if you want to completely eliminate blind spots in your risk identification, your collaborative workshops need a beautifully balanced pie of perspectives. Sure, IT is naturally going to focus heavily on technical threats, but you absolutely need legal at the table to point out the severe compliance liabilities of a potential breach. You need operations to highlight physical security gaps on the factory floor. And you need management to align all these identified risks with overarching business objectives. Without that cross-departmental stakeholder input, you're not building a comprehensive ISMS, you're just building an IT project.
Because tapping into those frontline employees gives you context that technical tools just can't see. Imagine an organization spending millions on military-grade digital encryption for their servers, feeling completely confident in their security posture. Meanwhile, down the hall, operations staff are casually tossing highly sensitive, unredacted paper records into an open recycling bin. The medical staff or operations team are really the only ones who can flag that physical vulnerability. Stakeholder engagement uncovers these super practical, human element risks that would otherwise bypass your digital defenses entirely.
And finally, Section 5. Documenting compliant risk findings. How to create indisputable audit evidence.
When you inevitably find the gap, and you will, it has to be documented with absolute precision. This logic applies heavily to nonconformity reports, or NCRs. Remember, an auditor isn't just looking for a list of problems, they're rigorously evaluating your capacity to trace a problem down to its core root cause. You can't just write, password policy is weak. No way. You have to provide the objective log data proving the weakness, analyze exactly why the policy failed at the administrative level, and present concrete corrective actions. This level of documentation proves your ISMS is capable of actual self-correction.
And please remember, a static, one-and-done risk assessment document is basically a guaranteed audit failure. The ISO ISC 12001-2023 standard fully assumes your business environment, and the threats facing it are going to change by tomorrow. You identify the risk, assess its impact, apply the treatment, and then you monitor it relentlessly. This continuous, dynamic loop is what ensures your compliance framework evolves right alongside the threat landscape, staying resilient and fully up to date.
So, you've got the advanced tools now, the cross-departmental workshops, the TVAs, the business impact analyses, and the historical data tracking. But here's the real question to leave you with. When that lead auditor sits down across from you, is your documentation going to show a proactive team that was successfully predicting the future, or a reactive team that was just taking really detailed notes on the past? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Stay secure out there and keep anticipating.